Hey friends, it's David with Remnant Homestead. I wanted to talk about some books I was reading last night. You're gonna have to bear with me because my animals are like particularly needy today, and so I've got cats and dogs in the room that are, all vying for my attention right now. But I'm gonna try to get through this without the zoo causing interference. But I wanted to talk about. I collect old books. There's a lot in my area. There's a lot of secondhand bookstores that specialize in old books, and particularly interesting ones to me are on farming practices, from the past. And one that I managed to pick up, it's called More Old English Farming Books. I don't know if that's going to focus or not, but 1731 to 1793. And I was reading through this, and one of the things that I thought was interesting, there's kind of a couple of historical big names in agricultural practices in Britain at the time. Jethro Tull actually being one of those, which is kind of funny to me because that's a musician as well. So the other was Richard North, which I may or may not actually be related to. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Anyway, one of the things that's talked about in here that I thought was particularly interesting was this reference to salt, what they called a foul salt, as being used as a manure, as a fertilizer. And in the book that it's originally mentioned in, it's called A New Treatise of Husbandry, Gardening, and Other Curious Matters Relating to Country Affairs. And that was published in 1739. And so in that book, this character, Mr. Livyings, has some, he's kind of self-promotion on his part, promoting this manure fertilizer that he had concocted. And it was later established that it was salt and saltpeter and wood or coal ash. And it talks about, the quantities. So just for your own curiosity, I'll say it's 12 pounds of common sea salt, 1 pound of saltpeter in powder, and 20 pounds of wood or coal ash finely sifted. So that's kind of like the recipe that's mentioned. And what I thought was interesting about that was salt. We typically think of salt as destroying growing environments, is basically being something that you put down to ensure that nothing will ever grow. But in this fertilizer, saltpeter, in case you don't know, that's potassium nitrate. That's, most agricultural fertilizers are using potassium nitrate in great quantities. But this was kind of a primitive, development of that. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So I was looking into it more and the benefits of salt in your garden. It's a thing. I highly recommend looking into it. Obviously, it's got to be diluted, but it provides a lot of trace minerals for your soil. And in a lot of these books, what's interesting to me is they were written as kind of a charity to Great Britain. These farmers were invested in improving the soil quality for the whole country. So that's what a lot of these authors were kind of trying to establish, was better fertile environment for all farmers, for the whole nation, which I think is just, you see this sort of like humanitarian effort coming out in the writing of these various authors, which is just something I don't know. Like I find that social aspect of it very interesting. So it's a really interesting book. This wealth of information to be had from these primitive farming practices, and obviously there's some discussion about the differences between England and Scotland and Ireland and the different soil types. Those things were kind of being figured out during this period for large-scale agricultural processes, bigger farming. So really fascinating bit of history in that. And it made me think about something else that a lot of folks aren't aware of. Before I bought my property, it's been 14 years since I've been out on this farm. This farm house was built in 1886, and it was an orchard. And I had concerns living in a farming community about, residual pesticide use in my area and things like that. So I was kind of curious, like, is there a way to deal with that? If you want to be like an organic farmer, or you just want to kind of grow your own food without the concerns about that in your soil. When you move out to a rural area and to a farming community, you don't know what was done on that property. So there's a lot of, things that you can do in terms of soil samples and testing. And, obviously, people should be having their wells tested, not just for the standard, your county's required, E. coli and all of that fun stuff, but also for any kind of POPs, persistent organic pollutants that could be in your water supply if you're in an area that's been farmed for any length of time. And where I am has been farmed for hundreds of years. So it's definitely something that I took into consideration. But not knowing the case with the soil and what I could end up running into, I was looking at ways to remediate any potential POPs, persistent organic pollutants. And I came across this book years ago, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. So there's 4 authors. This is a scientific book. This is not, the joys of farming kind of thing. Okay, like this is very, very, very detailed information. You're going to have a pretty good basic understanding of chemistry, and but there are some charts that it provides that give some really good information on how to remediate certain pollutants. And so radiation is one of them, but a lot of the really bad chemicals involved in modern agricultural processes are discussed as well. So it's a process called phytoremediation. And the book is called Biochemical Mechanisms of Detoxification in Higher Plants. It's a mouthful. So phytoremediation is basically how plants and photosynthesis together break down highly toxic environmental pollutants and purify them into a simpler form that can be dispersed in the environment safely. And I'm surprised more people don't know about this. To me, this is like absolutely revolutionary. So, pollution is definitely a very, very big problem, obviously all over the world. And you kind of get 2 mentalities involved whenever you start talking about it. I think a lot of people, because of politics, tend to, dismiss it as an issue, but it is very much an issue. And the chemical soup that we live in is obviously not doing good things for our health. And, if you live on a farm or in an agricultural area, you have no clue. You could have had tractors dumping diesel, hydraulic fluid. You got like mechanics working on their vehicles, dumping, brake fluid all over your property, which has all sorts of terrible stuff in it. Actually, it's the antifreeze and brake fluid that's actually toxic. It's kind of interesting, the ethylene glycol. But at any rate, there's a lot of really, really good breakdown of the plants themselves and kind of their biomechanical methods of taking in environmental pollutants. So one of the things folks might know about, for example, in this process is lead in chocolate. So if you haven't heard about this, your first time hearing about it, any real chocolate has, lead in it. And the reason for that is the plant absorbs lead out of the environment, like out of soil. And it takes it into the plant. And then unfortunately that gets used to make chocolate. So you can look at, there's all sorts of organizations out there, I forget the name of them offhand, but that measure the quantities of lead in chocolate. And if you're a big chocolate fan, probably a good idea to find one that has safer levels of lead in it. If you're not concerned about how real your chocolate is, Hershey's actually has 0 because it's not real chocolate at all. But at any rate, the biomechanisms of phytoremediation are absolutely astounding. And one of the things that I found most common for the process of phytoremediation were a lot of prairie grasses tend to safely remediate environmental pollutants out of your soil. So when I moved here, I let it go wild. I literally let the property just grow crazy. And where my goat pasture is now, for probably, I want to say it's probably like 7 years, I let it just go wild. And I had trees in there. And then I eventually just brush hogged it and, turned it into pasture. But, you'll get all sorts of different grasses growing when you let things go wild like that. And they all have different levels of detoxification. And what is so astounding about this to me is that it is absolutely 100% proof that God's design is perfect. There is a lot of talk about radiation, cleanup, using this. It's an amazing book. And I understand it's actually more affordable now than when I bought this book. You can get this on Amazon for like $103, $105 or something. But when I got it, it was like, 3 times that. So I understand not everybody has the interest or the money necessarily to spend on a book like this. But I just kind of wanted to talk about this book and its significance and how it can help you build your property and remediate it. And if you have concerns about I want to put a garden in this area, and you're conscious about that sort of thing, like what used to be there, and you start digging down and you find, there was an old barn here and who knows what's, buried here and who knows what's in this soil. And if that's the kind of I take those things into consideration, maybe not everybody does. This actually can tell you specifically what you can do to remediate very specific spills. So like oil and gas, which are really not that big of a deal in terms of, unless you bury it in the ground, it actually remediates on its own pretty well. It is an organic material, oil is. The synthetics, though, on the other hand, are not. And so a lot of these synthetic chemicals can be broken down into their natural, more primitive state through phytoremediation and then dissipate in the same way that like crude oil would in the environment. It will eventually break down if it's exposed to sun and the elements and all that wonderful stuff, and the plants themselves. So nature is amazing at cleaning up the environment, and give it the right plants in the right amount of time, and it'll do it, in some cases quite rapidly. So the prairie grasses were particularly interesting to me because they remediate so much, and so many different POPs, persistent organic pollutants. But they particularly good at dealing with atrazine and some of these agricultural chemicals that are in the environment from pesticides and fertilizers. So I highly recommend this book. And if anybody had any questions about anything specific that you're dealing with, in your environment, or concerns that you have, I'd be happy to see if I can find a solution, or if you want to get the book yourself, you can do it yourself. But I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about it. And if there's a particular problem that you're dealing with on your property, or something that you're, concerned about, I'd be happy to look it up in here and see if I can find an answer for you. But just kind of wanted to mention that, between those two, a little bit of light reading last night, I was just finding it very fascinating that salt, contrary to popular belief, is not going to kill your garden. It's actually quite good for your garden when used right. And historically, that was what was used to prepare soil through a lot of Great Britain, who has a legacy of agriculture. Probably the most substantial contribution to agriculture came out of Great Britain. And and then how that, transposed to Scotland and Ireland, and the practices in completely different soils, very, not optimal agricultural areas for many reasons. The practices, and you probably know about like the use of seaweed in Ireland to enrich the soil. These kind of primitive methods, like it was all about really putting mineral in the soil and creating, that humus from bacteria and fungus. But the foul salt that this gentleman had discovered was so beneficial was saltpeter, sea salt, and wood ash. And it was, along with other things, fermented. So it's very fascinating to me to just read about these old agricultural processes and see how it relates to modern, deeply scientific understanding of remediation and preparing soil. Fascinating stuff, the old and the new kind of coming together, and what we can learn. There's a lot of great information out there. And if you have any old agricultural books, old farming books, I would love to hear about it. I mean, if there's something that you think is really worthwhile for me to, look into finding, I'm always on the lookout for different titles. And this does talk about quite a few books from the past, but I'm sure there's others that, aren't mentioned in there, and I'd love to hear about them. So drop a comment below. I'd love to hear about it. Thank you so much. God bless.